Educational Communications and this station present Environmental Directions with Nancy Perlman. On this series, we explore the effects of human influence on the Earth's ecosystems and discuss solutions to environmental problems which affect the quality of life on this planet. Environmental Directions gives you the kind of information you need to help you participate in decisions impacting your community, the nation, and the world. Now, here's your host, Nancy Perlman.
Hello. For the next half hour, we're going to be talking about outdoor adventures in the Nordic countries as well as the United States. And we're going to be talking about sustainable tourism with my guest, Kevin Rosenberg. He is owner and lead guide at International Adventure Guides. He's a licensed mountain guide and kayak guide, a wilderness EMT, and also teaches about wilderness medicine, navigation, survival, and outdoor skills. He was a former naval officer and former attorney and former owner of Gear to Go Outfitters. Welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thanks for having me on.
You have been leading small groups of people to places like Iceland, Greenland, Norway, Sweden, the Faroe Islands, Denmark, as well as parts of the United States. And I'd like to talk about these very beautiful Nordic countries. You need to explain where they really are located, because Greenland, we know, is the largest island in the world, but it's part of the North American continent, and yet Sweden and Norway are on a peninsula in Europe. Tell us about these different locations.
Sure. So Iceland is actually split. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge actually runs right through Iceland, and Iceland's the only part of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge above the ocean surface. So the southwest third of Iceland is actually on the North American tectonic plate. Most of the country to the east of that is in the Eurasian tectonic plate. So in Iceland, you can actually walk or adventure or even swim and snorkel between North America and Eurasia, between tectonic plates. Really a fascinating place. Greenland is fully within North America on the tectonic plate, but politically and in terms of all their commerce and their lines of communication, being within the Kingdom of Denmark, they're really orientated towards Europe, even though they're in North America. The Faroe Islands are east of Iceland and north of Scotland. They're also within the Kingdom of Denmark. When we say Scandinavia, we're really only talking about Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. It often gets expanded to include all of the Nordic region, but the Nordic countries are going to be Iceland, Greenland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, the Faroe Islands, and Finland. So in terms of ecology and geology, we're both in Arctic and subarctic terrain in most of these regions, with the exception of Denmark.
Let's talk about some of the ecosystems, because they are in the north. They can get very cold in the wintertime. Iceland, we know, has a lot of volcanoes and geothermal energy. Greenland has a lot of glaciers, but not volcanoes. We know that in the Scandinavian area, there are very unique animals like the reindeer.
Yep, Iceland actually sits on a magma plume. Along with New Zealand, it's some of the youngest land in the world. It's actually still growing. It's still spreading out east and west each year. That's why it's so volcanically active. It's a bit predictable. They are able to measure when magma chambers fill up or when they have more seismic activity. It's rarely a surprise when an eruption happens. They are able to deal with it and live among it. In terms of the environment, the magma and the core temperature is so high, so close to the Earth's surface, it makes geothermal energy really easy in Iceland. And Iceland doesn't have any fossil fuel power plants. It's mostly geothermal energy, and then they have some hydroelectric and some solar. So from an environmental perspective, really a leading country. They're even really advanced in carbon capture technology and that kind of stuff as well. Iceland does have several glaciers, a glacial bay that has icebergs. Greenland, which on the map, because of the mnemonic projection of a map or on the globe, it looks huge. It's actually about the size of Mexico, but some of the least densely populated places on Earth. There's about 57,000 people in the entire country. Again, the size of Mexico, divided into 3 different cultures even that linguistically can't always communicate with each other because they've been isolated from each other for so long. 80% of Greenland is covered by ice cap. Not even glacier, just like ice cap. Not even moving back and forth the way a glacier does. With several glaciers connecting to the ice cap, advancing and retreating, and sadly nowadays mostly retreating. And also a very educational place to see the immediate effects of global warming before they reach the rest of the world. Continuing on to Scandinavia, you'd actually be surprised that a lot of these countries in these regions, aside from Greenland, are warmer than you would expect. Because of the Gulf Stream blocking a lot of the Arctic air, Iceland is usually warmer in the wintertime than New York or Boston even, where we get the full Canadian and Arctic air coming down to affect the weather. Norway is about 80% the size of California and similar in shape in terms of how it kind of goes up the coast. There are regions in Norway that are well above the Arctic Circle and very cold. And also there's the unique governance of Svalbard, the island well north that's within Norway but also open to more international travel. I always think of Norway as being the kind of the high mountains and the fjords. You get down to Sweden, it's kind of going downhill a little bit. You still have hills and mountains and beautiful fjords and places to go kayaking and stuff and hiking. When you get to Finland, it's more just forests. So it's still beautiful and unique and great culture. Denmark, kind of the trading capital, is really flat. It's on the mainland of Europe as well. Denmark's a great place to go biking, not such a great place to go hiking up a mountain.
Quite a diverse topography in these different locations. Indeed, I've been to Denmark. It is flat. Sweden has the boreal forest. Norway, the fjords and the waterfalls are outstanding. I haven't had the opportunity to visit some of the other islands, but I've seen the pictures, and indeed the fjords, the glaciers, the beautiful landscape is stunning and unique. When we're in the out of doors, we want to see the animals and the plants. Some of the animals are always there, whether or not they're the reptiles, the insects, and some of the local mammals. Birds fly around. Are these areas on fly routes for migrating birds, or do they have mostly birds that stay in the different countries?
So definitely both. The most notable of the migratory birds that everyone loves to see are the puffins. They spend 9 months of the year in the middle of the ocean. They actually live in the ocean. They only come on land to basically hatch their eggs and raise their young, basically. Iceland's really well known for puffins, but because of the volume of tourists, you can only get so close. The Faroe Islands, much less people. In the Faroe Islands archipelago, you can get within 6 feet of the puffins. The only reason it's only within 6 feet is that's like the safe distance where you're not disturbing them. You can get amazing photos and just experience like the awe of just like being on this beautiful mountaintop, looking out over the ocean with like hundreds, if not thousands of puffins all over the place around you. Flying, walking around the ground, coming out of nests, it's just incredible.
Of course, seeing the plants is easy, but what are some of the different plants and flowers and trees?
So the two of the most notable ones for me are going to be in Greenland. First of all, there's cotton grass, which literally looks like cotton, but it's also kind of a warning sign of swamps and really rough terrain. So if you want wet boots, walk where you see cotton grass. The other one in Greenland, which I really love, is Angelica. It kind of looks almost like long celery stalks, almost dandelion-like flowers on the end. They're kind of white, and it grows on the edge of a lot of streams. The Inuit will actually cut the stem up, put sugar on it, and bake it, and it's really a delicious snack. It's made its way into a lot of the new Nordic cuisine. You might see Angelica in beer, in cocktails, in food, in sauces.
Because they're islands and near the water, there's a lot of marine life to see.
Yeah, so you actually have some land mammals as well. You'll have reindeer, Greenlandic, it's called tutu. There's also muskoxen in most of the Scandinavian languages, it's muskus, and umimuk in Greenlandic. I always describe them kind of as, think of like a woolly mammoth the size of a cow. That would basically be a muskoxen. A muskoxen you'll see in Greenland and also in Norway as well. You will see some reindeer in East Iceland, but very few. There's Arctic fox in several of these areas as well. And then, of course, in Greenland, in the north, in the wintertime, you have polar bear. A lot of diversity there. I think Greenland has the most unique marine life as well. You're going to have the narwhal and all kinds of whale and seals, incredible biodiversity. You'll see that in the Norwegian fjords as well and over Iceland. But the region is really just, if you want to see some unique wildlife and unique landscapes, it really is like an adventurer's paradise going to the Nordic region.
Some of these places, you literally have to take a boat, a kayak, or walk to get to. They don't have roads going around the entire islands.
Yeah, even Iceland, I think the ring road was only built in the 70s or early 80s. In Greenland, to get between towns, cities, settlements, so to speak, you need to either fly or take a boat. Or you could walk. We do a trip where we walk for several days between the major airport in Kangerlussuaq to the second biggest city along the coast called Sissamute. The full version of that trail is at least 8 days of travel, but we kind of do a 5-day version of part of it for our guests that really gives them a unique off-trail experience. But even in Iceland, to see the Arctic fox, there's a wildlife refuge for Arctic fox in northwest Iceland in the West Fjords area that, again, you have to hike to or take a boat to actually view it.
Your company, International Adventure Guides, provides individualized trips, private trips, as well as publicized trips that people can sign on, but you keep the numbers low so everybody can really have an experience of feeling as though they are in the wild.
Yep, we like to limit our groups to 12 guests and 2 guides, depending on the type of trip we're doing. I feel that kind of gives you a nice small group experience where you still have the opportunity to make new friends and share the experience without feeling like you're on a coach bus tour or on infantry maneuvers. We have done for private organizations and groups, much larger groups. We had a contract with the United Nations for a while. For their high school, we ran trips about 100 students and teachers.
It's fun reading your memoir, Duct Tape and Baling Wire, because you talk about many different kinds of adventures, but why the title Duct Tape and Baling Wire?
My memoir is a bit of a Horatio Alger story of starting Gear to Go Outfitters as a street stand during the Great Recession and growing into $1 million company. And along the way, as an entrepreneur, there's an old Western expression about keeping it together with duct tape and baling wire, kind of barely holding it together. So kind of doing everything yourself as an entrepreneur and finding ways to be creative and innovative when you don't have the resources of a bigger company to get things done. So I thought Duct Tape and Baling Wire was a great title for my memoir of kind of having to be creative and resourceful to accomplish things that you would normally expect someone to have a lot of resources to do.
You've taken so many outdoor adventures. How did you decide which ones to write about, and tell us about one of your most memorable?
I detail my outdoor adventures, but also my military adventures. I flew jets in the Navy. I was on a guided missile frigate hunting submarines and boarding ships in the Persian Gulf. And then I volunteered to go back on active duty for the Iraq War, even though I was protesting against it, went overseas with a coastal warfare unit. So I kind of talk about some of those adventures, like my first nighttime solo flight, losing an engine on takeoff, turned out to be a bat strike, not even a bird strike, and almost having to eject out of the aircraft at just 23 years old, bringing the plane around and landing it safely. One of my favorite outdoor experiences was the first time I trekked in Greenland, scouting out the Arctic Circle Trail, which at the time, maybe 200 people a year had done. First time in Greenland, I set out from the airport to reach the coast, and the first 4 days, I didn't see a single person. Not even on the horizon. It was just me and the reindeer. Second day, I remember walking along the lake, and an eagle burst to flight at my feet. And I remember saying, holy expletive, And then I realized, wow, I just spoke. I hadn't spoken to anybody in a couple of days now. And then on that journey, reaching a little hut in the middle of nowhere, I assumed would be empty, and finding an entire Inuit family there on a family hunting trip. They embraced me. They taught me Greenlandic words. I got to try reindeer for the first time. We're still friends. And of course, being in the 21st century, we're also Facebook friends. And they are now part of my trips that we do. We actually have dinner at their house at the conclusion of the hike with my guests. And my guests get to experience a real local, intimate cultural experience in Greenland as well.
That's the beautiful thing about traveling, is you get so much cultural and natural history all at the same time. We're going to talk more about these adventures in the Nordic countries as well as the United States when we return in a moment with my guest, Kevin Rosenberg.
Environmental Directions with Nancy Perlman continues with further discussion of the world's critical ecological issues. For more information, you may call 310-559-9160 or go to www.ecoprojects.org. Now, here's Nancy.
I'm speaking with Kevin Rosenberg, who is owner and lead guide with International Adventure Guides. As you mentioned, the stories in your memoir included that of being a former naval officer, but you are also a former attorney, and you worked with the Department of Justice's Environment and Natural Resources Division on environmental law issues. I am curious, which of these countries that you've traveled to, Iceland, Greenland, Norway, Sweden, Faroe Islands, Denmark, and the United States, has the best ecological laws?
Iceland is one of the most eco-friendly countries in the world. They really value the environment. They also really focus on avoiding the ills and minimizing the ills of tourism, of rampant tourism. They've experienced a tourism boom that threatens some of these natural resources and landscapes and parks. They've dealt effectively with that. Following Iceland, I would say Norway kind of leads the way. They're a bit of a contradiction. They're an oil-producing nation that is real big on the environment. So they don't use oil to heat their homes. It's almost more expensive to buy a gas-powered car because of taxes in Norway than it would be to buy an electric vehicle. So they really promote the environment. They're really concerned about the environment and global warming, but at the same time, they're producing oil and selling it to other nations that are polluting.
Both you and I have been promoting responsible, sustainable tourism, ecotourism. Just because people are going into nature and seeing the out of doors doesn't mean that they are responsibly taking care of nature and conserving the ecosystems and the flora and fauna. What have you seen as the changes, whether or not it's trying to reduce the plastic consumption, whether or not it's having some tourist dollars go to creating new wildlife refuges, sanctuaries, parks, or taking other actions?
Yeah, so a lot of it comes from overuse or uneducated use of certain areas, along with the idea that once an area becomes popular, it kind of tramples on the environment and takes away from what people are hoping to enjoy. And I think the wilderness should be restorative, and there's kind of an explorer within all of us that comes out in nature and in the wilderness. What I've seen is on the Arctic Circle Trail over the years, I first hiked it in 2014. It was a true solitude experience where you felt like you were an explorer, like you were one of the first people to ever trek there. And then now with the abundance of GPS devices, GPS apps for phones, and phones actually having a true GPS capability, more people have felt confident to go do this trail. So what used to be no trail at all, or 12 different trails that people just kind of chose their own route as they navigated across the land, now has become a well-worn path that is so well-worn that it can often flood out when it rains. So I've been working with the people in Greenland that kind of manage the Arctic Circle Trail to establish a permitting fee. It'd be roughly around $100. And that would go towards educating people in advance where to walk, how to bury their waste, what to do with their trash, how to even set up their tent, whether to use a stove or a fire and that kind of stuff, as well as creating a job for a local student or young adult to be what's called a ridge runner, where they would basically kind of patrol the trail system, both educating people, checking for permits, and also correcting wrong behavior on the trail to kind of protect the resource that people come in to enjoy, and also that especially these native communities really depend on for their livelihood.
That's a great project and great idea. I've been hiking and backpacking my entire life, and we've always said, pack it in, pack it out. Let's not leave that trash there.
Absolutely.
The United States, sadly, has not saved a lot of its natural areas as parks or wilderness. What percentage of the land have these various countries saved in the Nordic communities?
One credit to the U.S. is that we did kind of invent the national park system, and that's where I think inspired a lot of other places. Much of Greenland is national park in the sense that it's almost uninhabitable and really patrolled by the Danish military on two-man dog sled teams, part of the Sirius Patrol. Iceland takes it really seriously in terms of lots of national parks. My rough estimate would be maybe 20-25% of Iceland is protected by national park. Norway has a ton of national parks as well. One of my favorites is Jotunheimen National Park. We have the highest mountains in Norway. So I think they really embrace that. They also have what's called the right to roam. So you can actually, as a backpacker, as a hiker, cross onto private land and camp there even. You can't do this within an area that's been improved for agriculture or for recreational use. You can't come within, I think, about 150 meters, so let's say like about 500 feet of a home or business, and you can't stay more than, I think, like 3 days or so in the same spot. But they really embrace the idea that the land belongs to everybody. They protected parts of national parks, but also with the right to roam mentality, kind of enabled you to experience the land as a free traveler.
The United Nations recognizes unique cultural and natural areas around the world as UNESCO designated sites, and there are some in these places. What are they?
So one of my favorites, again, as you can tell, Greenland's kind of my favorite spot for adventure, but the Ilulissat Ice Fjord is one of the, I think, most well-known ones in Greenland. It's where the icebergs will calve off of one of the glaciers, and then they have to get over a sandbar to make their way out into Iceberg Alley. It's reported or thought that the Titanic's iceberg actually originated from this ice fjord next to Ilulissat, Greenland. While they're melting down to get over the sandbar, they'll fill this bay with just icebergs. It's just incredible to see. It's such a protected area, you can't even kayak into the ice fjord. So we'll kayak on the icebergs that have kind of made their way out. We'll kayak near those, not right next to them, because you obviously don't want to be next to an iceberg when it capsizes or calves off a smaller piece of ice. You can hike alongside of it. Also, the area between Kangerlussuaq and Sisimiut in Greenland, also protected by UNESCO. and are kind of preserved just for wildlife. There's also cultural areas as well in these countries that are also protected as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. In Norway, you have Bergen, you have Bryggen Center, which is a Hanseatic League city, kind of a collection of old buildings and warehouses within the more modern city of Bergen. UNESCO has a great program, and you'll find plenty of UNESCO sites in the Nordic region.
There's one place that doesn't encourage visitors, and that is one of the few world seed banks that's trying to save all the seeds in the world and preserve them in an ice cave. I think it's in Norway.
I believe it's actually up in Svalbard. So Svalbard is really unique. It's well north of the mainland of Norway. It's owned by Norway, but also there are other countries that have competing claims to it. Russia, it's obviously even more complicated now given this situation in Ukraine, but they've had towns on Svalbard as well as some coal mine operations. But it's one of the areas, too, where you don't need a visa from the Norwegian government to work. Kind of a unique area, unique diplomatically, environmentally, and culturally. I think it's the furthest north permanently populated cities and towns, and that's where I believe where they have this, the food bank is obviously the ground to be frozen. And the idea there was that should there be some dramatic incident or climate change continues and wipes out species of plants and flowers and such, they would have the examples of everything in the seed bank to kind of repopulate the earth with those plants.
You are a wilderness EMT. That's emergency medical technician. You teach wilderness medicine, navigation, survival, outdoor skills. Obviously, when people are in a group hiking, it's pretty safe and you don't have to worry about that. But it's good to have those skills and that knowledge whether or not you're going out alone or with a group. What is the situation for people? Can they go of all ages, and whether or not they just want an easy walk or a more difficult hike?
We kind of have an adventure for everybody. So we have what we call a soft adventure, more hotel-based, light hiking, up to hardcore adventures where we're starting out by landing craft, hitting the beach, and bushwhacking across the tundra. We take care of all the planning for you and make sure you're safe on the adventures. It could be in Iceland, where we have our Iceland escape trip in the summertime. We give you a tour of Reykjavik. We go on ATVs in between tectonic plates. We ride Icelandic horses. We hike up to a geothermal stream and go swimming in the middle of nowhere. We hike into a lava tunnel, see the Golden Circle tour, all in just a few days, and all with really amazing food and accommodations along the way, both in Reykjavik and also at smaller boutique hotels in the countryside. Our more extreme adventures would be a night or two in a hotel to begin with, and then we do usually a 4-day, 5-day outdoor adventure where either it's going to be in tents, cabins, huts, or hotels.
It makes me want to definitely go to Iceland, Greenland, Faroe Islands. I've been to Denmark. It's a lovely area, a lot of cultural history. Sweden, I remember taking the train from the south to the north, and that's a grand adventure, and even staying at the youth hostels, like staying in one of our motels. They were so fine and well equipped. And Norway, taking the bus tour across from Bergen to Oslo, just seeing those waterfalls constantly. But I did mention that you also lead in the United States, and we're a big country. We have a lot of mountains, we have a lot of deserts, a lot of lakes and rivers to kayak and raft. So what is one of your favorite outdoor adventures here in America?
So I think one of the most overlooked areas for outdoor adventure is southern Arizona. You actually have what we call sky islands, these mountain ranges kind of popping up from the desert, where you go from like 2,000 feet of the desert floor up to 10,000 feet or more. It's the equivalent of driving from Mexico to Canada. There's even ski resorts just outside of Tucson, southernmost ski resort in North America. So just an incredible diversity of flora and fauna, starting out with lizards and snakes and cactus down below, getting up into bighorn sheep and black bear and pine trees on tops of these mountains in Arizona. It's kind of funny that people don't always necessarily recognize the need for a guide in their own country, even if they don't have any experience at all in the outdoors, which often leads to a lot of rescues, unfortunately. But as soon as they cross the international border, they're like, hey, I need a guide. I've always felt that Europe's treasure is history and culture, and our treasure is wilderness. Just the amazing diversity of wilderness we have and the abundance of it
I certainly love southern Arizona and northern Arizona and the Red Rock country. There's so much in that state to offer. As you mentioned, Americans are not as used to taking guides when they think they can hike along. But I have found that when you go with a guide or a naturalist, you don't have to worry about where to go or anything. The guide provides so much information about what you're seeing, what you're looking at, make sure that you're safe and sound. It's really an enlightened and heightened experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
You've mentioned the Inuit people, who are the indigenous people of Greenland. They used to be called Eskimos, but yet the Nordic countries are also famous for the Vikings. Are there still remnants of Viking culture?
Absolutely. There also are the Sami people in northern Norway, Sweden, and Finland, are the native people of the areas that early on intermingled and fought and traded with what we know as the Vikings and the Scandinavian settlers of the region. Not everyone who was living in Scandinavia during the Viking Age was actually a Viking. Vikings were almost more the pirates. The people would kind of go with the Vikings, would go with the pirates and raid and trade and go over the place. There definitely is a very proud heritage in the Viking Age. I know the Danes always like to tease the English of how they ran the country for a while and kind of ruled England for a while. There still is remnants both in terms of culture, historic sites, sometimes a little bit of a playful presentation of it. You can go to some incredible museums in Norway where they've actually recreated Viking longhouses. In Trondheim, where actually I lived for the better part of a year, Trondheim, Norway, you have St. Olaf's Cathedral. St. Olaf is kind of a controversial figure in history, but he's the person responsible for bringing Christianity to the Vikings and to the Nordic region, transitioning from the pagan religions that preceded it.
The Sami people are the indigenous people of Norway, Sweden, Finland, and they're famous for herding reindeer. They don't have any flying reindeer, do they?
No, definitely not. I'm sure that would be a great attraction for tourism in Finland and the Lapland area. They do a lot of Santa villages, but I've never seen a red-nosed reindeer or any kind of flying reindeer, but they can jump pretty well.
Some of these places don't have a lot of forest, but yet Norway and Sweden definitely have the forests.
Yes, there's a lot of debate of what happened to the trees in Iceland, whether or not they were torn down for shelter or iron smelting, but there were trees in Iceland when settlers first arrived around 871 or so, and there are efforts to kind of replant certain areas of Iceland with trees, so you will see some forest. One area in particular that's had trees continuously is Thorsmark, which literally means Thor's Woods, and it's the area that supposedly inspired Tolkien to write Lord of the Rings, of seeing this area almost as the entrance to Middle-earth, with the forest and the really harsh volcanic landscape as well, not too far away from the volcano that erupted in 2010, which is Eyjafjallajökull, that kind of disrupted air travel to Europe. In Norway, the spruce trees and evergreens, it's really beautiful to see, really lush environments. I always love areas such as Bessagan and other areas as well. You can see the diversity in the color of the water even. You see the glacial water coming in really turquoise, with the regular snowmelt kind of being a darker blue as well. Walking on a ridge in Jotunheimen and Home of the Giants National Park, really spectacular sight. Norway is going to be very much forested, the mountains, Sweden as well, and then Finland's kind of more of a woodland environment. Something more that people might be used to from the northeast United States in Norway, Sweden, and Finland, rather than the unique landscapes of Greenland and Iceland and even the Faroe Islands.
You love adventure, don't you?
Life should be an adventure, and travel should match with that. So get out there and just have an adventure, whatever that means. I mean, something that's kind of like unexplored, unknown. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. Have an adventure this year. The meaning of life is adventure. Get out there and explore our world, meet other people, experience other cultures, try new foods, leave things to chance somewhat, and don't have everything so planned. Just get out there and see what happens.
You certainly have many, many different experiences that you provide to see beautiful nature, culture. I want to thank you so very much for sharing them with us. Thank you for being my guest.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you in the Nordic region sometime soon.
Definitely want to join you. I've been speaking with Kevin Rosenberg, who is owner and lead guide at International Adventure Guides and author of Duct Tape and Baling Wire. I'm Nancy Pearlman. Thank you very much for joining us, and do tune in again next week.
If you would like free information about these environmental issues, go to www.ecoprojects.org or call 310-559-9160. Environmental Directions with your host, Nancy Perlman, is a community affairs program of the nonprofit organization Educational Communications and this station.